Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. For those of you that are new to the channel, in this channel I typically discuss some medical related stuff. I share insights into what my daily life is like as a resident physician, and I also show some parts of my life outside the hospital. But in today's video, I'll be reflecting and talking about my process from completing my undergrad in Canada and moving to the US and starting medical school in the United States. And I also talk a little bit about the decisions and why I decided to make that jump from leaving Canada, moving to the US to pursue medical school. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so for those of you that aren't aware, in both Canada and the US, before you go to medical school, you do have to complete an undergraduate study first. So medical school is a graduate study. It's a second degree. You can't just go from high school to medical school. You first have to complete your undergraduate, and it could be in anything. You could get your undergraduate in anything. It could be a Bachelor of Arts, it could be a Bachelor of Science, it could be nursing, like I did. I got my Bachelor of Science in nursing. Some medical schools do require some prerequisites. So even though you're a Bachelor of Arts or a finance student, you do have to take some of those prerequisite classes. It could be biology, chemistry, biochemistry. Some schools do require physics. Some require some English or literature. So it depends. Every school has different requirements and prerequisites, but you could study on your undergraduate in anything. So I completed mine in nursing. I got my Bachelor of Science in nursing in Canada, in Nova Scotia, Canada. Shout out St. Francis Xavier. But anyways, after that, I knew the next path was to try and pursue medical school. But I decided to leave Canada and move to the US to pursue that. And there are many reasons for that. Number one, Canada is extremely competitive. It is competitive to get into medical school in the US as well, but it's a lot more competitive in Canada compared to US. And that's not just my opinion. There are also some stats to back that. And there are various reasons for that. So in Canada, there's a total of about 17 medical schools, just 17 at the moment. Whereas in the US, there's about, I believe, 159 allopathic medical schools. So that's the MD medical schools. The US population is about 10 times that of Canada's population. But regardless, the vast difference in the number of medical schools is just staggering. And on top of that too, the difference in the classes. So in the US, most US schools have on average more seats compared to the Canadian medical schools. So the US schools can take more students compared to the Canadian medical schools. And in the US, there are also a lot more hospitals, so a lot more places for these medical students to go train. Both countries are dealing with deficits in the amount of physicians, especially primary care physicians, so like family doctors, especially in Canada. But they've also got that difficulty of trying to train more to meet the demand, and just because of the limitations with the number of seats and also the number of hospitals to train. But with that being said, with the typical economic law of supply and demand, because in Canada there's a lot more demand than there is supply, it makes it more competitive compared to the US. And then secondly, in Canada, because there are limited spots and also limited schools, programs tend to be a lot more selective, because like I mentioned before, there is that difference in the deficit of the amount of primary care physicians in the country compared to those being trained. So most programs tend to keep their own and select students from their province. So that increases the chances of those students staying back after they graduate medical school to work in the province. So for example, British Columbia, which is the third biggest province in Canada, only has one medical school, the University of British Columbia, which is staggering. The largest province, the two largest provinces in Canada are both Ontario and Quebec. Ontario does have the most of any province in the amount of medical schools. Ontario has about 6 medical schools. Quebec has about 4. But the 4 in Quebec, 3 of them are primarily just French speaking. Some provinces don't even have a medical school. So Prince Edward's Island and Newfoundland don't have any medical school. Nova Scotia only has 1 medical school in Dalhousie University, and they tend to be more selective for people from the Maritimes. So Nova Scotia, Prince Edward's Island, and also Newfoundland. And of course, the territories, the Northwest Territories, don't have any medical schools. So if you're an individual that's from Newfoundland, for example, you've got 1, no medical school in your province. 2, you're very limited in that you can, like, your chances of getting accepted is mostly just in like Dalhousie University, the one in Nova Scotia. Because Ontario medical schools will want to keep Ontario students. Quebec medical schools will want to keep Quebec students. British Columbia medical students, medical schools would want to keep British Columbia students. Most of the acceptances are individuals that are from British Columbia. So if you're a British Columbia resident, then your chances of getting accepted to University of British Columbia Medical School increases a lot more. But if you're from Newfoundland, you have a lower chance. So that tends to make it more competitive. Most people do apply multiple times to get into medical schools in the US, and most people also apply to about, on average, probably about 10 to 20 programs. In Canada, you don't even have that option because there's no need for you to apply to some schools that are outside the province, because your chance of getting accepted is much lower than it is realistic. And on top of that, you can't even apply to 20 programs because 20 programs don't exist. So all of that is to say that it is incredibly a lot more difficult to get into medical school in Canada. And Canadian medical schools also tend to be a lot more selective in how they choose and accept applicants because of just how competitive it is. So some programs tend to look at the most competitive part of the entrance board exam, which is the MCAT board exam. They tend to focus more on the CARS section, which is the literature section, and is notoriously known to be the most difficult part of the MCAT exam. Moving on, I left Canada and moved to the US to start my career as a registered nurse before I applied to medical school. And I decided to apply to hospitals that were affiliated with medical schools. Got my first job offer at a hospital that was affiliated with the medical school I ended up going to, which is Michigan State University College of Human Medicine. So started working on a cardiovascular step-down unit as a registered nurse at Spectrum Health Hospital, as it was called at that time. And this was all part of like the bigger plan and the bigger goal. Get work experience in a hospital that's affiliated with the medical school. That way I'm already in the system. And when it comes to time to apply for medical school, at least I already have my name in the system. I already have some form of like affiliation and connection with the medical school. And that paid off. I worked as a registered nurse for 2.5 years, just under 3 years. And one of my letters of recommendation was from a surgeon that I worked very closely with. Looking back at it, would I do things a little bit different? I honestly probably not. There are some difficulties with being a Canadian that's applying to schools in the US. One, my options are limited compared to American citizens, of course. Some of the bigger negative is actually the fees itself. So in Canada, universities are subsidized by the government compared to here in the US. So even though I have more options here in the US, it is a lot more expensive for me being an international applicant because for one, I don't get the in-state tuition, which some of my colleagues got, and their tuition was literally like half of mine. And then on top of that too, I couldn't get the federal student loan option or the federal financial aid because again, I'm not American, but people from here can get that. So my student loan had to come from a private bank in Canada. So those are like probably the biggest hurdles. But other than that, as long as like you know all that, you're aware of all of that, it'll help inform you best on how to approach it. So if you're someone who feels like the financial hurdle is a lot higher than the other hurdles to gain admission in Canada, then of course applying to medical schools in Canada will make a lot more sense for Canadian citizens. But if you're someone who feels like you don't mind taking on some of that extra financial burden in the form of student loans, then applying to medical schools in US or looking into those options is something to also consider. Other hurdles to also consider for Canadians trying to apply to medical schools in US will be like homesickness. It's a real thing. The US is very different compared to Canada in their mentality and their lifestyle. And if you don't have family members here, homesickness is something to obviously be aware of, as well as all the logistics of figuring out your visa, insurances, even little things like your driver's license, all those little things that come with moving to a new country. And then the US dollar is higher than the Canadian dollar. It makes overall cost of living even more difficult. Feel free to leave any comments with any questions, or feel free to reach out with any questions. I hope this was helpful to anyone that's thinking about initiating this process. Medical school is something that is very taxing and something that is very stressful, but with the right mindset and with the right support and with the right village behind you, it is possible, it is doable. I'm a living proof of that, and always willing to answer any questions anyone has. Thank you for watching. If you haven't yet, please do hit that subscribe and do give the video a thumbs up if you find it helpful. And feel free to share it with anyone who might also find it helpful. All right, thank you all. Have a good day. Bye.